You remember the sound, that specific sound, low, choppy, almost mechanical, the sound of a dial-up modem connecting, the sound you could recognize from the next room over. And it meant that tonight, you might actually manage to download that song. Maybe, if nobody picked up the phone, you lived that. And you also lived the exact moment that sound disappeared forever. That's what most people don't understand about you. You're not nostalgic because you're old. You're nostalgic because you were the last witness to something that no longer exists anywhere, not even in the memory of people born 5 years after you. And psychologists are only just beginning to understand what that did to your brain. If you were born between 1986 and 1990, you belong to a generation that popular culture has never quite known how to name. Not quite Generation X, not really a millennial. The labels you've been handed, Zennial, Geriatric Millennial, the Oregon Trail generation, never quite fit because a label that tries to split the difference between two real things doesn't capture what it actually feels like to live in the gap between them. But here is what psychologists have discovered about this specific birth window, and what they found is more significant than anything you've ever been told. Start with this. When you were 10 years old, boredom was real. Not the boredom of someone scrolling through a screen and finding nothing interesting. The deep, heavy boredom of a summer afternoon with nothing. No notifications, no algorithms suggesting something, just you, time passing, and the obligation to find something yourself. That kind of boredom builds something in the brain. Neuroscientists call it the capacity for active rest, the ability to generate ideas, connections, creativity from a state of zero stimulation. It's a skill, and it's a skill that generations born after 1995 have almost never had the opportunity to develop. You have it, it's wired into you, and it's becoming increasingly rare. But the story doesn't stop there, because that same person, you, at 10 years old, in that real boredom, went through something unique in human history. Over the course of 10 years, between the ages of 15 and 25, the world your brain had learned to inhabit was almost entirely replaced. Developmental psychologists call this a cohort effect. The historical and environmental conditions a generation passes through during their formative years leave a structural imprint on psychology. Not a preference, not a habit, an actual change in how the brain is wired. The generation born during the Great Depression never quite recovered from it. They thought differently about risk and security for the rest of their lives. The conditions had become part of the mental architecture. You experienced two cohort effects in a single lifetime. The first wired you for patience, physical connection, slow information, self-reliance. The second rewired you for speed, digital communication, instant access, permanent connectivity. Most generations only get one. You absorbed both simultaneously while you were building your adult identity. And then there was 2008. A study published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics by economists Malmendier and Nagel tracked how early economic experience permanently shapes financial psychology across a lifetime. Their conclusion: people who experience economic collapse during their formative years don't adjust and recover the way older people do. The experience changes their relationship to risk, financial security, and institutional trust at a structural level, and it persists long after the economic conditions improve. For you, that collapse was 2008, and the timing was precise in the worst possible way. You were between 18 and 22 years old. Your first job, your first apartment, The first time you were trying to build something that looked like an adult life and the floor dropped. You are not anxious about financial security because of a character flaw. Your relationship to money and stability was calibrated by the exact conditions of the precise moment you became an adult. That calibration is not irrational. It is the most rational possible response to what actually happened. But here is what nobody has ever clearly told you. You speak two languages, not in the linguistic sense, in the cultural and cognitive sense. You are fluent in an analog world and a digital one because you were required to learn both from scratch, in real time, without a guide, in the middle of your own development. And those two languages give you something very few people possess: the ability to translate. When someone in their 50s can't understand why their inbox has become unmanageable, you understand both sides of that divide. When someone in their 20s can't understand why getting no reply to a message can be the most anxious thing in the world, you remember exactly what it felt like to wait. Really wait, without knowing. That translation ability is rare, and it becomes more valuable every year. There's something else. The neuroscience of adaptation shows that the most flexible brains are those that have had to recalibrate most often under pressure. Not in a stable environment, not gradually. Under pressure, fast, without a safety net. You did that, not once, not twice, continuously, for an entire decade, at the most vulnerable moment of your development. Every time the world changed, and it changed fast, every 2 or 3 years, something fundamental. You adapted. Not because someone handed you a map, but because you had no other option. And because your childhood had already taught you to figure things out on your own, slowly, before the pace increased. What that builds is something generational labels don't really capture. It's not nostalgia, even though you have more of it than most. It's not cynicism, even though you've earned every trace of it. It's something closer to a specific, hard-won perspective, the perspective of someone who has lived inside more than one version of reality and knows, not theoretically, but from the inside, how quickly everything that feels permanent turns out to be temporary. Remember that sound, the modem, the sound of a connection being established, slow, loud, precarious. You put your finger on the key and you waited. Sometimes it worked, sometimes someone picked up the phone and everything collapsed. You already knew at that age that nothing was guaranteed, that things could disappear, that patience was a survival skill. What psychologists are documenting today is that this generation, yours, may be the last to carry inside it the physical embodied memory of what life felt like before the digital world took control. Not as an intellectual fact, as a lived memory. And the people who can do that, who can hold both worlds at once, are rarely completely disoriented when the world changes again. You are not the forgotten generation. You are the generation that learned to carry two worlds at once, and nobody handed you that. You built it in the gap between everything else.